YAFers on this side, College Libertarians on this side. Welcome to the foreign policy debate between our two groups. I don't know if you had a chance to catch the last debate on social issues. Went very well.
Yeah.
We're going to start. You want to take over? Say the
Sure.
format?
So, format of the debate, first issue will be, I don't need that. First issue will be defense and military budgets. Second issue will be Snowden NSA. Third issue will be interventionism. So, audience questions for whatever you want. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, great. So we'll start. We have a random coin toss. We'll start with the YAFers on military budget and spending.
Oh yeah, right. 2-minute opening statement each, I guess.
So go ahead, guys.
So we believe that the United States, as the world's greatest power, has a number of privileges and responsibilities. History has shown us that there really has been no period of time of greater economic prosperity and human flourishing since the United States has become this world leader. Therefore, as the world's most preeminent power, both militarily and economically, we believe the United States has the responsibility of continuing to promote peace and prosperity across the globe. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Your opening statement.
The libertarian position on our position for defense and military spending is that our military is too large. It is too bloated, and there are plenty of places that can be cut. I think we believe that there is by no means a sacrificing in military capability by cutting back on spending and pulling back from our where our locations are abroad. In fact, we would argue that how we have overstretched ourselves in countless places across the world has impeded our ability to have a more nimble and effective military that can actually respond to foreign and domestic threats. Moreover, we believe that the emphasis should be on defense spending and not military spending, and we have blurred the lines between those two gaps, and we have far surpassed what could be considered defense spending, have just moved into pure military spending on things that do not promote national defense here in America.
All right. So should we do question format or like go for it? Okay, so your response to College Libertarians' opening statement. A few questions later.
Well, we do have the largest military spending in the world, but that is something that's good, and that's something that we agree with, because our military is very important, and further, other countries are currently increasing their budget. For example, China is rapidly developing their military budget because they're trying to develop themselves in the world. Continuing our military expenditure is simply a sign of our commitment to our armed forces, and having the best technology in the world for our soldiers is of the utmost importance. And finally, by having the largest military in the world, we have caused a period of overall peace that's been unrivaled in the history of the world.
Okay, so your side, what are some specific aspects you think that could be cut in the military budget? I'm assuming that's more of where you guys stand.
I'm glad you asked. There are plenty of places and plenty of room to cut. Contrary to what Nancy Pelosi said, the cupboard is not bare. There are things that we can cut. And we could start with how I mentioned earlier, how we have very much overextended ourselves abroad, as we are currently in at least 700 bases in 38 foreign countries, which is already excluding several nations which are considered integral to active operations in Iraq and Afghanistan currently. And in addition to that, we have military personnel stationed in 148 countries, clocking close to 400,000 personnel. That sounds like a huge, massive military, and plenty of places can be cut. Why do we have bases in Germany or Japan or Australia? These are developed nations World War II ended three-quarters of a century ago. I think that it's time that we can pull back and not continue to subsidize the defense of these countries who are more than economically stable enough to pay for their own defense. I mean, that is money taken directly from you and I, the taxpayers here in America, to fund bases and subsidize defense of people like Germany. In addition to that, we have the entire procurement process for military weapons and cash, which is a ridiculous and overbloated process. One of the most famous examples being the F-22 fighter jet, which was chosen in 1991 to begin a contract for Lockheed Martin. And the plane did not become operational until 14 years later, at which billions of dollars had been thrown away on this project, and the whole purpose of these planes, which were in an air fight with the Soviet Union, which no longer existed, had rendered them now defunct.
Okay. So, yeah, how would you respond as the justification for those funding and the need for those aspects that gentleman over here just mentioned?
Sure. Well, I mean, certainly, I'd like to correct something on the F-22. I mean, that is currently that airplane right there has been able to establish American air superiority. And like we already said before, the gap is closing. I mean, countries like China are currently working on their 5th generation fighters and almost their 6th generation fighters too. I mean, Russia's doing this too. I see there's no reason for us to stop while the world is continuing to move. The F-22, now we're moving on to the F-35 at this point, which is going to be a multi-role combat fighter that will have multiple purposes. As you know, that we are coming back the A-10 to eventually push that out of service. So we are doing things to really kind of revitalize our military, but I don't think that there's any reason for us to assume that this world is becoming any safer just because that we have this military superiority, and that for us to let it kind of sit there and for those countries to catch up.
How about specifically on the aspects of military bases we talked about in certain countries? Justification for that?
Well, yes, our military is extended throughout the world, but make no mistake, that's not just for other countries' security. Being in Germany and Japan, maybe it was initially because, yeah, their security, they didn't have any after World War II, but it still serves us, both economically and mostly militarily in the event of a threat, to be able to quickly respond to any potential problem.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Respond.
So, two things. It is important to differentiate between where does American interest have a legitimate place and a role to play. So, for instance, the United States is currently still at war with North Korea, so that's a place of interest where it makes sense to have the military close by. Though you have other places like Saudi Arabia, Germany, where perhaps it doesn't make sense to keep troops there. Maybe they're placing more people in danger than they're saving. It's probably too expensive to keep them there, and it's also allowing countries to benefit out of the taxpayers' money. But it's more important to realize the complexity of the question regarding the balance between spending and safety, because for the American public, safety is of incredible importance, and it's very difficult to say how much fighter jet is going to improve the nation's military capacity and how much safer are we going to be than with a similar jet or 10 jets who are like smaller and faster. But for those who are doubting the fact that we can cut in the military, there's this great movie that I love. It's called the Pentagon Wars. It describes the building and allocation for money of the M2 Bradley, which is a military tank. And so the story, and this is based on the actual story. The story begins on the proposition for a tank to take troops from the base to where they need to be deployed. And then their contractors that are coming to place. They want to raise the price, and then more material has to be bought, and more expenses are incurred with the pretense that it's making the American people safe.
Okay, time's up. All right, audience questions for either side. Shoot.
Any questions pertaining to the defense budget?
Defense military spending?
I know libertarians are big on free trade. how would we go about facilitating free trade if the U.S. Navy didn't control the rights of navigation by having bases in Bahrain, Australia, Japan, and Germany?
I could answer. It would be difficult. You have to negotiate with the countries adjacent to the waters. It would make it more complex. But the principle here is trying to respect the property rights of other nations. And if that presents difficulties, then in theory we should deal with it. We should try to get consent of other countries. We should try to figure ways which, although they're expensive, are more legitimate ways theoretically.
How about you guys?
Same question.
Sure.
Well, I mean, our answer to that question is yes. The establishment of the United States Navy protecting waters and sea naval navigation is obviously critical to free trade because, as you know, not too long ago, only a few decades during World War II, the seas were not a safe place, and even still today, the issue of Somalian pirates and things like that, the seas are really still a dangerous place, and in fact, the United States Navy is out there to protect our free trade interests and our civilian contractors and private industry, which is a great thing.
All right, other questions? You, then you.
Libertarians, you talked about military assets in Japan. What, I guess, a more general question relating to that is, what is your take on some of the defense agreements we've established with states like Japan, where we've agreed in treaties to provide certain defense assets on the condition that we have leverage in their defense decisions?
Right. I mean, we would argue engaging in such treaties becomes inherently problematic for us, where we agree for some kind of memorandum, which is where we can talk about Ukraine later, but is where I would see with the memorandum that we made with Ukraine a couple of decades ago to have them disarm their nuclear weapons and promise that we would protect them. And now you see us getting embroiled in that issue now, and that decision we made to engage in one of those that was a non-binding treaty, it was more of a memorandum, but engaging in those kind of behaviors set us up for issues later down the road where we get entangled with these countries and are required to continue providing assistance to them that they no longer need and that outweigh the benefits of our U.S. interests, where we would argue that money is better spent here at home instead of in bases there, propping up Japan's defense.
If I could say something.
Here, actually, I'm just going to move on to the next question. Actually, you first, then I have one question for each side.
Sure.
You raise your hand.
So it's going to be directed to both, but primarily, yeah. So how do you decide where to allocate your resources given the enormity of the possibilities of where you can, the defense budget has so many different specificities. There are so many different projects you could begin or continue to fund or increase funding for. How do you decide where to go? Maybe you have to cut someplace to fund another place. It's not a perpetual increase of funds. There aren't the funds there to support all these programs. How do you decide what to go with and what not?
Sure. I mean, definitely agree with you. It's a complex issue because, like you said, there's a lot of maintenance that needs to be continued with. There's a lot of expansion that needs to be dealt with, a lot of contraction, a lot of modernization. Now, we would argue that modernization is probably the most intelligent thing to do because, to unintelligently expand doesn't make sense, right? So it's illogical to do that. Modernization really has its own other benefits to it too. For example, it's almost like the NASA effect, where the more technology you put in, military technology often has civilian uses too, like how NASA has a lot of technology that made its way into the commercial market to help civilians too. So I definitely think that developing projects, the F-35 and new technology it should be a strong focus of us because we have to adapt to the new conditions and new situations that the world is providing. I mean, it's definitely, the world is changing, we can't deny that. And certainly, the air industry benefits from it. Boeing, these airline companies also benefit all of it. I mean, it's definitely, modernization should be a key focus, and I think that it's reasonable to expect that we should repurpose our forces if need be. I wouldn't go ahead and say that, I wouldn't argue that being everywhere is not good because that is an element of being able to be ready, readiness.
All right, finish up.
Yeah.
Okay, good deal. So I'm just going to ask one closing question. The U.S. spends $700 billion on defense per year. What is the number that you think should be spent on defense? There's been debates over whether to increase the defense budget, decrease it. What should be a number, and how do you approach figuring out that number? And yeah, you can respond to each other from before if you want to, real quick.
Can we begin?
Why don't you
If
go first, 'cause
okay.
they
If
finished.
I may just quickly respond to that and answering that question, I think when it comes to modernization, the government really sucks at doing that. And I think my colleagues here on YAF can agree with me that there are other places of the government that is not really good at when it comes to modernizing and whatever their regulatory body agencies may be, and that those have disastrous consequences. And defense is certainly no exception. As you mentioned again, the F-35, that sticker price was originally $65 million. A decade has passed, and now it is $158 million. And this is the nature of government, essentially, and defense is falling exactly prey to that. And so I think modernization is important, but these are the issues that we deal with. Currently, we're relying on our B-2 planes until 2040. That is the official position, but we only have 20 of them, and they cost
Finish
$2
up
billion
really fast.
apiece. So
15 seconds.
If I could say something it's all about opportunity cost. We need to see if there's other places in the government where the money could be better spent. It's not only about decreasing military spending, but about where that money should be spent. Maybe we could do better in paying our liabilities. Maybe we could do better in investing in other programs. So it's not only about how much should we cut, but where that money should be going in comparison to where it's currently going.
Okay.
All right, guys, we'll have a minute response to that, and then we'll move on to our next issue.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell you myself what our spending should be because I would leave that to the analysts and those who know what they're really talking about in terms of our. It needs to, like I said, it needs to be adapted to the circumstances that we find ourselves in. But I think what's important to note is that it's really easy for us as civilians here in the States to make these kind of judgments about the military and whatnot. I certainly know I have a number of relatives and friends in the military who will tell you that when they're out there in the field and they hear a bullet go whizzing by their ear, they're very appreciative of the kind of superior military technology that the United States has been able to provide for them. So I think that definitely you have to understand that it's a whole other situation out there, and it's I would leave it to those who know to let them decide.
Next issue.
All right, nice. We're going to move on to our next issue, which is Snowden.
And the NSA.
Say.
So I look forward to hearing like some fiery questions, and
forward to
it
them
should be
too.
fun.
So Liberty's guys.
Maybe not as fun as when we debate social issues, but still pretty fun.
You guys can
Do you
take
want
your-
an opening
Yeah, go
statement?
ahead.
Opening
Take an
statement, 2 minutes.
Okay. So, we, the College Libertarians, believe that the NSA has been committing gross violations of constitutional rights of Americans, specifically violating the Fourth Amendment, through its mass collection of metadata, where it issues one warrant and is able to then search thousands or hundreds of thousands of Americans' phone records with that one warrant, which is clearly not pursuant to what the Fourth Amendment guarantees individual rights of American citizens, which is that a single warrant needs to be pursuant to something with probable cause and then issued and then a search conducted. So we, in terms of Snowden's part that he has played in this, we have seen that him giving all this information to the public and leaking this information is the reason why we can be here today having this debate in the first place. Without him have done that, without him leaking all that information, we would continue to be in the dark about these egregious violations of our civil liberties. And so with that respect, I would commend Snowden for releasing those documents. That's sufficient.
You guys want to take your opening statement?
Snowden is neither a hero nor is he a whistleblower. There's a difference between being a whistleblower when you know something is going on, which is not right. And it's a completely other thing to go to another country, which would be even difficult to call an ally at this point in time, and disclose all of this information, and just to the general public. In fact, before he left the United States, Snowden attempted to release similar information to the Washington Post. They turned him down because they didn't agree with releasing some of the sensitive information which he had. Now, it would be one thing for Snowden to simply whistleblow in the sense to say that we are maybe going beyond our what we should be without disclosing exactly what we're doing, without giving the terrorists an advantage and other countries an advantage to know what we're doing. The NSA may be overstepping its bounds slightly, but for Snowden to go out and disclose everything that we do is grossly inappropriate.
Rebuttal, and also speak to his concern about other nations having some sort of advantage over the United States due to them releasing this, or due to Snowden releasing this information.
In regards to strategic disadvantages, there is some truth to that. There's few countries that can parallel the technological advance that the United States has in that area to make such a great leap out of it. I mean, you have Russia, you have some European countries, and they already have similar programs. And it's not like they do not know that metadata exists. They do not know that you can collect content. So it is not necessarily an extra advantage that they're having. They already have spy programs. You know, they have the MI6 exists. There are other spy programs that do similar things. And the problem here, however, is whether we think what the NSA is constitutional or not, right? Because if it's constitutional, then what Snowden did was wrong. Because under the law, the United States had the ability to do what he wanted to do, and we should be against somebody who violated the ranking system in the military system. But if you think it's a violation of the Constitution, then he was completely justified in trying to leak this information. Nobody has been proven to have been placed in danger because of this, and it was clearly, I believe it's a clear example of a violation of the Fourth Amendment. They're not only checking at metadata, but other programs have come to light that say that they record or keep content. So it's not only the phone records. That's a different program, and what the government usually is saying is, well, we just look at the who's calling, how long it's calling. You have metadata, which I would argue it's also property, and it's also should be considered under the Fourth Amendment. But even if you disagree with me, they're also keeping content of emails and other traffic in the internet.
Finish up.
Which constitute a violation to the Fourth Amendment. Therefore, their actions were unconstitutional, and I believe Snowden did the best that he could with the information that he had.
So YAF, why don't you speak about their concern that they view the metadata program as constitutional, speak to the constitutionality of that, and then how you think Snowden should be treated. What should happen with him as a result?
Yeah, sure. I think that, like we've already said, we don't believe that Snowden is a true whistleblower. Again, with the constitutionality issue, I think we think that national security is not really a near issue about transparency. I wouldn't argue that to say that every single common citizen should be in the loop of the kind of things that we do to protect our country, because that, if it's common information, that means it's also information that our enemies can obtain too. So I think that we have to remember that the NSA itself has said that since July 2013, this is post Boston, of course, over 60 terrorist plots have been foiled thanks to their programs. And national security is, again, I mean, it's an issue of, it's not an issue of transparency. And again, with Snowden, there are proper channels to go about doing this whistleblowing activity. The whole point of our United States legal system is that there are those proper methods of doing that. And it can be changed through, it's all of government oversight, so it can be changed through the current existing political channels. These kind of subversive acts are the things that terrorists or extremist groups who can't do those kind of things do. Certainly, he definitely broke the legal contract when he signed up to say that he's a government contractor and he will not disclose information. He did that. So if you want me to say from right there on a legal basis, he should be prosecuted for that because he broke a contract.
What do you think a fair punishment would be if he were to be prosecuted?
Snowden will be tried by the legal system and face the laws which we have in the United States. He signed a contract and he should be penalized for Britain.
Okay.
Do we have a rebuttal?
Why don't we just do a quick rebuttal for each side, say a minute each.
Okay. We got plenty of things to talk about. So you had mentioned that he violated a contract. He also, when he was into this job, if I believe it was correct, he also swore an oath to the Constitution, which is why he had every right. He went to the proper channels to try and disclose his information, and his superiors denied him. He fled to Russia, not because Russia is where he would like to be, but because, as we were discussing earlier with military abroad, the U.S. has a lot of influence around the world, and there are very few places that someone can escape that influence without seeking persecution. Moreover, I would point to our past very true whistleblower, who was Thomas Drake, who exposed Trailblazer as a terrible pre-NSA program in 2003, and which the NSA admitted was a terrible program and was stopped after $1 billion were wasted. He went through every channel to expose this. He was ignored. He went properly redacting information, going to reporters, exposing no classified information to try and get this through, and he was consistently denied. At one point, the FBI came and raided his home, held his family at gunpoint, and took all of his books, materials, computers, anything from his home, and then charged him with 8 counts something for essentially a life sentence. And he refused to plea. And this is how we treat whistleblowers in this country. So I do not look at Snowden running away with any surprise whatsoever. I can completely understand why someone who would expose flaws and unconstitutional parts of our government, of having every reason to leave this country and not stand that kind of persecution that one can expect from whistleblowers. And so, also, in addition to that, what was I going to say? And when you were discussing the 60 terrorist plots have been thwarted, I think that is highly exaggerated.
Finish up.
The President's Review Group on Intelligence Communication Technology said there has been no instance in which the NSA could say with confidence that the outcome would have been different without the telephony metadata program.
YAF, your rebuttal?
Well, we've spoken a lot about Snowden, and our point's very clear. He violated his contract regardless, and he put our country and the military and so forth in danger by doing so. What we would like to speak about is about the NSA's collection of metadata, because we haven't really touched that point yet. Now, the metadata that the NSA collects, for instance, emails and phone calls, it's governed by something known as the third-party doctrine. Now, when you talk on the phone, you're also giving the phone company that information. So, where do you draw the line? Why can the phone company have that information, but not someone else? It's all about a reasonable expectation of privacy. Now, it would be a completely opposite scenario if they were, for instance, bug your home, because you own that home, and it's something that you expect. You have that expectation of privacy. However, when you talk on the phone, you go on the internet, you search on Google, you go on Facebook, send Facebook messages, search things, so forth. The administrators of those websites can see what you did. So, again, if they are allowed to see it, and why is the government not privileged to that information?
No, we can't.
Let's take a quick 30-second response, and we'll open it up to audience questions.
Something. How many here, when they talk on the phone, thinks it's unreasonable to expect that the federal government is not recording your messages, keeping them for several years, in case you ever become a person of interest and they can use it against you? I believe the American public has already spoke on that issue, and when you use it's about reasonability. This is completely unreasonable. This is 1984 type of mentality where you're presumed to be guilty and we're going to hold information about you until it becomes meaningful to us. You need a court to say that you need a court for it to be legitimate. You cannot just hold information of people and then expect that people will be okay with it, because people are not. The court of public opinion has already reached a verdict.
All right. Next question.
Sure, you guys have any questions?
So this is for YAF. You guys said that you would have preferred Edward Snowden to have said the NSA is doing something wrong, they're overstepping their bounds without providing any information. that the public wouldn't have normally been privileged to. But would you believe a guy who just ran around saying the NSA is doing something wrong without providing any sort of proof?
Yeah, I think that, again, you can separate the fact that he leaked information about who, where, and who, and how. And the fact of the matter is, he not only spread information that we were looking at these other countries and we were doing this to citizens and everything, but he also spread information about the methods that we were using too, which again is like almost as if we were to give our blueprints for our M2 Bradley and for our all our military equipment. It's the same thing. If we were just give those to the Russians and the Chinese, I think it's again that's the idea of spreading information that has direct implications to our national security and to the security of our military, our CIA, and our other domestic agencies. That I think that he overstepped those boundaries. And I agree with you that there's a reasonable expectation of what he would provide that people would believe. But I think that definitely he went way too far. He said way too much, and he definitely violated the security of the United States.
Maybe just 30-second response.
I think it's important to. What has been revealed is extremely important, and metadata. I do not want to undercut how effective metadata can be. And a simple, Jonathan Mayer, Patrick Moultrie conducted an experiment where they had volunteers and they collected their metadata phone records and they saw what they could figure out just using publicly available things like Google and Yelp. And they were able to guess 20% of the time the exact person who they were speaking with, and they were able to guess 75% of the time what that person's religion was. And they came up with examples like this, which is biased. This is directly targeting women here, but one of the examples they provided was participant E had a long early morning call with her sister. 2 days later, she placed a series of calls to local Planned Parenthood location, then placed brief additional calls 2 weeks later, and made a final call a month after.
All right.
Can anybody guess what she was doing with that metadata? I think you can find out things about people through metadata, a lot more than we think.
Okay.
One question, I guess, if you want to conclude this topic.
Yes.
21st, okay, we'll do one more audience question. It's 21st century. Real world. We have all these different ways to communicate out there. How do you propose, if we were to have, restrictions on government, intrusion in this, how do we regulate it? I mean, you could easily have someone in the government tap in somebody's wire without anybody even know about it, bypass the laws completely.
2 points would be, I just wanted to first answer one of the things that he was saying. He was saying, countries like China will have our information on how to spy on people. I think that's funny because China already spies on its people. China already has the capacity and already actually does these kinds of programs. So I don't think we need to be worrying about it. The same thing goes with Russia. But in regards to the question that you're saying is, it's all about contractual law and the court system. So for instance, things the FICA court, which tries to determine whether it's reasonable for the government to be able to tap on into this information, and up till now there has not been
Finish up.
There has not been an opposition that represents the interest of the people who are being wiretapped. So if you add that to the system, that's a plus. And another one is just make it through contractual law that when you make a contract with AT&T or these big corporations, that they are stating that they will not. That you are the owner of your digital information, and that they are not required to give it to the government, or not without a fight in the courts.
Did you have a question?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but when you create a Gmail account, for instance, you accept the privacy terms, and in those privacy terms it says they can give your data to the government in the event of a legal warrant. And under the Fourth Amendment, it says that the government just has to name the location and the thing being searched. So if the NSA says we want a warrant to search Google data center in San Francisco, California, and collect data, how is that unconstitutional?
Right. You've enumerated laws that have been written, like the FISA Amendment Act, specifically 702, which authorizes this program. And those laws have been written, and so therefore, yes, the FISA court, the NSA can do that. And just because the laws have been written doesn't mean those laws are not unconstitutional. And I think that's where the issue pertains here. This is not, we have written FISA we have established the FISA courts and written laws to put them into effect, and those are what we are saying, well, those are the laws in the books, therefore they're constitutional. That doesn't simply make it so. That's what we're arguing here, is that those laws themselves are unconstitutional. So I think going just one step further, I would argue that I think it's important to understand how unsettling this is. When we have a FISA court, it rubber stamps in excess of 99% of NSA requests. FISA courts are not permitted to retain any records of their work, can't use their writing materials, their BlackBerrys, their iPhones, any documents they've signed. The NSA has all of it. They are the only person there. There is no defendant on the other side of this court. And the NSA collects and retains all of the information. Not even the court who rubber stamped the job, rubber stamped the warrant, is able to have any of that information. Does that not strike you as unsettlingly not constitutional?
All right. So what is the proper role of the NSA? If you could design it, should it, I mean, I don't know if you think it should exist or not, but what is its proper role?
The NSA's role is to keep the United States safe. And since 9/11, it's done an exceedingly good job at that task. And of course, before 9/11, it wasn't really doing much to prevent or to avoid terrorist attacks. So that's the National Security Agency's place. And through these programs, which we've been discussing, they have greatly accomplished that task.
Okay.
I just want to harp on that point one more time. Let's not pretend that the NSA has been an effective instrument. I think in the Senate Appropriations Committee, General Keith Alexander, director of the NSA, said that this program has helped prevent dozens of terrorist events here and abroad. And then when pressed further on that, he continued to retreat from that statement, emphasizing that they helped and that there was no definitive he could not cite one definitive instance where the NSA was something where he would assign the credit for stopping a terrorist attack. And like I said earlier, the president's own review group on intelligence and communication technologies, after reviewing the NSA and these allegations that they've made, said that they could not say with any confidence that the outcome would have been any different in these situations without the use of the telephony metadata program. None whatsoever.
I can finish saying something.
Sure, finish up, we'll move on to our next issue.
Look,
Final one.
as you were saying, like, as we move to the 21st century, yes, the NSA should exist. It should exist because defense is a legitimate role of government, and the digital infrastructure of the country has already been placed at risk. I think the Chinese have already have been blamed for a couple of attacks on electric plants, I think. So there's definitely a place on preventing cyber terrorism, on preventing digital warfare in some sense. But there needs to be a differentiation in regards to when are we violating the rights of the civilians and when are we attempting to protect civilians. And I think the violation of the Fourth Amendment in this particular case is not an example of trying to help the public.
Okay, I think we've heard enough on this issue. So let's move on to our final one of military intervention. You guys cite specific examples. Russia, I'm sure, will come up. Anything else that you guys want to use to support your side's philosophy, intervention, non-intervention? So, YAF, you guys want to take an opening statement on this for 2 minutes?
Yeah, sure. So I think we believe that the United States, as a world power, again, we have certain privileges, we have certain responsibilities, and among those, we have a role to protect, protect the right to life across the globe. Certainly, the period of peace that we've seen the past over 60 years, or lack of large state war, I can really attribute to one thing and one thing only: American military superiority. You have to understand there's two concepts here that really define this. You have hegemonic stability, and you have the democratic peace theory, okay? So just hegemonic stability just means that as the world's power, no one has tried to challenge us because they know that they'll never win. And the second thing, democratic peace theory, just means that democracies are usually friends and not enemies. So in the recent years, in the recent waves of democratization, we've had more friends in the world than enemies. So really, I can tell you that the kind of peace that we see is a direct result of American influence abroad. So that we see no reason for us to think that we have the world is small enough where we can be isolationist and ignore the problems around us.
The U.S. has no inherent responsibility to meddle into the affairs of other nations, and in fact, in many cases, it places the nation at risk. as libertarians, we are not isolationist. We believe on the use of soft power in order to achieve the political goals and the spreading of democracy, the spreading of legitimate rule. But that's not what the United States is currently doing. The United States is guilty of placing dictators in other countries. It is guilty of propping puppet governments in order to do its bidding, which has consequences, severe consequences for the civilians on those nations. A good example could be Egypt. Another one would be Iran, where force was used in order to prop military dictatorship, which abused its people. With the knowledge of the U.S. government, another example could be Saddam Hussein, which gassed the Kurds and killed many civilians with weaponry provided by the U.S. government. Also, Egypt, second largest recipient of U.S. aid behind Israel, and has also been, it's already known to have tortured its people. There's a large list of things that I could mention regarding the improper use of the foreign policy of the United States and its military might to meddle in other countries' affairs. What I would say is, let's try to solve the pragmatic problems that we're facing through soft power and through economic embargoes, through other means that are not by imposing our own puppet governments on other places. No, I use the word us as to represent, talking from the U.S. perspective. Anyway.
Why don't you respond, discuss foreign aid a little bit.
Foreign aid. So I'd just like to first address the idea of soft power. I think that soft power, all demonstrations of power are good, but I can tell you that I don't think that soft power is an effective tool, because you really don't see, in a lot of cases, brazen leaders will not really care about those kind of things. Countries, like Iraq and Saddam Hussein, you can do all you want, but it had to take some real force to get him, set him straight. So, but in terms of foreign aid, we think that definitely foreign aid is an important role in the United States, and sometimes it can be very effective. I mean, to be able to send dollars and weapons to countries like Ukraine, who are currently being threatened by other powers, who are allies, is certainly it's an effective tool, because again, it allows us to be able to support our allies without the involvement of U.S. boots on the ground. So of course, we're going to be reasonable here and say that demonstrations of soft power are good, but they're not. I think that there's sometimes decisively you need good shows of strength, because that's big stick theory. That's the only thing that sometimes people respond to. And has that made the world safer? We would think so. Yes.
So, to follow up to that, regarding Russia exactly, I think President Obama was justified the way he handled it. What else do you think he should do?
Well, President Obama did take a step in the right direction. He did make some borderline weak restrictions on travel on some Russian officials. But really, that's not changing too much. That's not really sending a definitive message to Russia that we do not support what they're trying to do in Ukraine. Of course, the United States, by no means are we saying that President Obama should have somehow committed to boots on the ground or something like that, put U.S. lives at risk. However, he should have, what he should have done is done more than sent a bunch of MREs to the Ukrainians as if that was supposed to make a large-scale difference in their resistance against the Russian power. What we should do, and have done to some part, is send Ukraine the financial aid which they need, as well as the military arms which they require, as well as advisors to show them how to use them.
I think as you brought up before too, I mean, the fact of the matter is, when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, we committed to them saying that we will protect countries like you who are our allies, and we want to promote our faith in you. And so the fact that we are really reneging on this commitment, I mean, you can say that you don't like the law to begin with, but the fact of the matter is that's already written in stone, it's in history, so you can't deny that it exists. And the fact that we're currently reneging on this commitment to them really shows symbolically, it's a core sign for the United States, because now it shows to other countries in the world and other non-state actors that we have no credibility to these countries who are our friends and allies.
Guys' response to that?
Yeah, your
yes.
take on what the U.S. should do, if anything?
We'll move on to
I
the
think
audience question.
we've been discussing a lot about aid and intervening specifically in Ukraine, and I think it is important to remember to look at the full context of how our involvement affects other countries abroad. And we have a terrible track record when it comes to these things. And just a couple of things leading up to, some highlights of American foreign policy. Before leading up to Ukraine, we have the Mujahideen, who we armed, who then ended up using those weapons against us in Iraq. We have Libya, where we decided to send them arms because that's what the U.S. likes to do. We like to send other people arms. We funnel them in through Qatar. They send them to the Libyan rebels. They get lost. We can't account for them. Some of them end up in the hands of the very terrorists who we're fighting. We don't believe that those arms were responsible for Benghazi, but we can't be sure of that. We have those arms then filtering from the terrorists that have finished the spat in Libya, pouring then with American weapons now later into Mali, causing an uprising there that the French and British have to then have to deal with. These are the effects what happens when we decide to get involved with other people. And especially with something that sounds as simple as arming another populace is never just that simple. When we decide that we want to arm this populace, they have an unstable government right there now in Ukraine that's not really official. It's an interim one. They are having elections on May 25th. We can't do a really solid government-to-government handoff of these weapons. We can't ensure that these get into the right hands. And let's not forget that we don't understand fully the situation in Ukraine. There are pro-Russian groups in there, like the eastern part of Ukraine. There's the western. Sorry. And there's the western part. There are a lot of factions competing right now, and it's not simple as clear-cut as these are the people who we should be backing, and we should just blindly give these people arms and hope that they succeed.
You think a quick 30-minute response?
30 minutes. I'm not.
Sorry.
I'm a bias there.
I prefer 30 minutes.
Let's do twice a minute.
There is a fine line between sending financial aid and armaments to Ukraine, which is someone we consider a friend, and the Mujahideen and whatnot, in situations where we're just trying to arm people to kind of fight people we don't like, like the Soviet Union in the past. There's a difference here. Ukraine is a friend, and we swore to protect them. We don't want to commit to boots on the ground, which is understandable in some ways, but we should be doing other things to help them out in their time of need.
I don't think that you can totally generalize on our past history, because you can look at countries, there's counterexamples of that too. South Korea, Germany, Japan, these are all countries that after these wars and conflicts we've gotten involved and have become some of our best allies and trading partners and economic friends. So I think it's certainly in our interest in a lot of cases, and I don't think that you can look at a few past failures and dictate a hard-line policy for the future, because furthermore, we learn from our mistakes in the past too. So certainly, every experience is a learning experience, and you can look forward and have a little more optimistic outlook to these other countries. I think that you can't dictate a hardline policy on just a couple of instances.
Quick response.
Okay, yes. This is what they're talking about is like the sound of the beating of the drum back to like Cold War mentality. Because you are arming a third nation to fight eventually against the Russians, as you're suggesting. That is a blatant act of war. Look, if I'm going to go and kill somebody else and somebody supplies me with weapons, they are complicit. They would go to jail. Like that's part of like the current moral framework in which we live in. And so, if you want to give weapons to the Ukrainians, be my guest. But declare war. Allow Congress to declare war on it and see what percentage of the American public is backing you. Because I don't think that would fly. But let's say it flies. Even then, there's still a very legitimate debate on what's happening in Ukraine, right? Because the president, which was elected, was going to sign a treaty with the European Union, and people were in favor of him. Russia offered them a bunch of money, and they changed their allegiance, right? So he fled the country because he was afraid of the backlash. But he's still the legitimate president of that country and took a decision that most people did not like. If an American president takes a decision that people do not like, does that make him not president? There's a legitimate debate regarding this issue. That's all I'm saying.
All right, let's get an audience question from, you guys can work in any response you have, like I said. Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is for the Libertarians. You mentioned earlier in your segment about that you believe in the use of soft power. I look at, for example, Cuba. We've had an embargo on them since the 50s in order to encourage them to change their government from communist to non-communist, and that's had no effect whatsoever. And in my mind, there really is no stronger use of soft power than a total embargo on them. What are your thoughts on that?
You're absolutely right. Economic embargoes do not always work. Another very good example is Iran, where economic embargo has not worked, or North Korea. The problem is not whether it will always work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not work. It is circumstantial. But the question is whether an escalation to violence is required, and that's what we oppose. There are certainly scenarios where that may be the case, but that is the most that we can try to do without going to the extreme of going to war. And if we're going to war, then we're going to war, and you declare war in Congress, and then you go to the proper means, and you do it in the proper way. You don't just send a missile, like the current president did, and say that it's not a war. Either you're in a war, and you declare war to Congress, or you create an economic embargo and use soft power to change things. That is my opinion.
You have to input on this, and I'll get to your question.
How do you feel about Cuba? Let's take Cuba.
Okay. Well, Cuba, yes, we don't support the communist government, and we did use soft power, as been stated. We have an embargo against them, and it's not working. So, speaking generally across scenarios where our soft power techniques don't work, what exactly are we supposed to do if we strongly oppose something that's going on? Do we just sit there and continue to take it? Oh, we have an embargo against them? What are we supposed to do then?
So I don't want to come across either as we're trying to be these crazy hawks either, because you have to, that doesn't make sense. You have to have a very compelling reason to put American boots on the ground. Those are our people, our children, our brothers and sisters. So I don't think that you need a compelling reason to put American boots on the ground. We're not trying to start war everywhere. But if you want to talk about fairness, I mean, the fact that Putin is putting masked, unflagged soldiers in there, I mean, it does not seem like they're fighting a fair war. So I don't think for any reason in this changing circumstances that we need to all of a sudden fight a fair, buy other things just because the other countries are not doing those kind of things. That's kind of a dangerous thing to try and say that we need to do that.
Okay, so I'm going to ask actually, you have a question first.
Yeah. Also, just really quick, I'd like to clarify, it's really in vogue now to say that our sanctions on Cuba are because of their communist government, and they're not. They're because of their blatant human rights violations. And that's something that continues to be a fact, and I know that for a fact. And actually my question is for the Libertarians. Insofar as not protecting Ukraine from outside threat after they give us their nuclear arms, how do you think that might affect our soft power, which we think is very important?
Well, I would say badly. It's a blow to the country. It prevents other countries from trusting the United States being able to defend them. But look, as long as there was not an implicit contract with the Ukraine, where the U.S. would be an ally to them and would protect them if Russia would invade them, that they don't have inherent moral obligation to do it. They don't have a contract requiring them to. The world is a very complex place. The United States cannot be involved everywhere. That injustices are being done, and there are many other countries, many scenarios where you could argue that the United States could solve an issue because one country invaded the other one. But that's not what the mission of the country is. Try to help where the mission of the country is trying to help where it can and when it has interest, but it's not certainly to be the policeman of the world and to tell everyone where the proper boundaries of their state is or what the true political ideology has to be. They certainly try to convince them, and that's the proper way to it. But yeah, it's a blowback, and it's a problem.
Okay, I have a question and a little bit of a history lesson for the Libertarians. In 1898, Cuba, under Spanish rule, had concentration camps that had the Cubans that were placed the Cubans. The Cubans were placed in. In 1902, when the Republic of Cuba was established, it was declared that Cuba would become a protectorate of the United States. Okay? In the 1950s, when Fidel Castro came on the Grand Mal in Cuba and attacked Macondo barracks, we had an agreement with President Batista that we would aid him. The United States did absolutely nothing, which is what you guys proposed, and look what happened to the nation. So my question is, how do you guys see that this works? How do you guys think that this works?
If they had a contract in order to supply Batista, in theory they should have enforced it, and they were wrong in not doing so. But the problem is, you're talking about ideology and like concentration camps and what the United States' proper role is. So let's say we applied that ideology consistently, right? So let's start invading North Korea. Let's cut ties with Saudi Arabia, which is guilty of many human rights violations. Let's invade China to start with, because they clearly are in great violations of human rights. China is a communist nation.
All right, this isn't a debate.
They had a contract. If you have a contract and you try to have an ally, then you have to defend it. And if they couldn't defend it, then it was wrong. But if you're going to argue that the United States should battle communist nations or nations that are against its ideology, the practical consequences of it are quite terrible. And I don't think you're willing to go to that extent.
Does anyone want to keep going, do a couple more questions, or should we stop right here?
One more question? Yeah. We'll go on to concluding statements.
In your world where the U.S. doesn't have bases in, say, Germany and Poland, and Russia goes into Ukraine, should they be allowed to go into Moldova, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Belarus, and if they want to, if they can, if no one stops them?
I understand your argument, and I think there's a lot of sympathy towards your argument that we need to be protecting Ukraine. And I think, personally, it is very naive to believe that we can protect a country that is literally neighboring Russia. And I think we made a mistake back then when we offered this protection to them by telling them to disarm the nuclear weapons in return for that protection, because, I mean, anyone with basic knowledge of foreign policy could have realized that promising protection to a country right next to Russia is going to eventually lead into some kind of escalation again. I mean, we could see this coming a mile away. It was only a matter of time before this happened again. And so I sympathize with your saying that there are, human rights violations, Russia invading other countries where they have no sovereignty to violate the sovereignty of other countries. The question becomes, is the U.S. the person who's in the position? Your position is opposed to ours, in that we don't believe that we should be the policemen of the world, that it is our responsibility to basically protect and fend off every human rights violation that occurs around the world. I mean, there are warlords in Africa right now. Why aren't we fixing those governments and restoring those people? There are tons of terrible things that happen around the world, and the U.S. is simply incapable of attending to all of them at once. And so that would be...
We'll take one more question from the audience. Mr. Breacher.
So if that is the case, that you don't believe that we should get involved anywhere else, really, would you have involved us in World War II, where potentially Hitler was going to take over the whole continent of Europe and Asia? Where do you draw the line in saying the U.S. has an interest in this, in preserving democracy, and where do you draw the line in saying the U.S. doesn't have an interest in this?
Well, when Hitler is taking over all of Europe, I would deem that as a legitimate threat to U.S. national security. I mean,
it's Europe,
right? I mean. Well, domination of an entire continent and then some, I would argue...
Russia, all of Asia.
Russia is all of it. Russia...
No, I'm asking if Russia takes over all of Eastern Europe and the Central Asia. You just argued that is okay. So I'm asking, why is that different?
I see. No, I understand your point. If Russia began invading other countries, there would obviously be strict condemnations coming from the U.S., and the rest of Europe, as that Europe would threaten to retaliate, as they're the clear ones right now that are being, have the most harm to face as Russia continues to move westward. I think at some point, if Russia is becoming this military power, I think Russia already, the Soviet Union collapsed in on itself already one time. They're not exactly in a position to start resuming world domination, moving westward. I think that's an interesting theoretical. But I really don't see
World War II was not theoretical.
World War II is not theoretical. Sorry.
Look,
let's see Yafin on this.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, let's do this for your concluding statement for 2 minutes. Start off with.
Or you can talk about whatever you said if you want for 30 seconds first. But let's do conclusion.
As the United States, we do have a place in the world to preserve democracy and foster it. And that's very much in our interest. Now, democracies do not typically fight each other. They typically get along and they trade well. And this has been a policy which has worked well for us. We have many friends in the world, which have caused us to have great trade, military allies, and economic stability. Now, if the U.S. is not going to be willing to be the one to do that, who will? And this is important because if the U.S. doesn't foster it, then we go back to this world of people fighting each other, the pre-World War II world. Now, moving on to conclude on our other points, having the largest military in the world is something that's very important. It keeps us all safe. It helps foster democracy, which I've been speaking of. It's not always necessary to put boots on the ground, but in some cases it is. Ukraine, maybe not one of those scenarios, but Russia starts pushing into Europe or Asia, maybe it is something that we should consider. It all depends on the scenario. So ultimately, yes, it is the U.S.'s job to protect democracy because that will serve our interests throughout the world now and in the future.
Yes.
The point that one of the persons here was making regarding World War II, it's well taken. But a counterexample could be World War I, where entangling allegiances cost many lives. There's certainly blurry line on when is it a foreign conflict that the United States should not be involved in because it doesn't have an interest on it, and when is it threatening geopolitics enough for it to make sense for the United States to take either preemptive action or just as a matter of national defense. But look, World War II is a perfect example, right? Because the Americans didn't get involved until Pearl Harbor, and they already knew that the genocide was going on. Like that didn't come as a surprise to the president, even though he pretended to. I mean, there's already documents showing that they already knew that this was going on. In fact, I think there was a ship from Germany with a bunch of Jews, which was returned during World War II to Germany. And look, it is a hard decision to make. And what we propose is that that America should try to keep us home the closest possible and try to not meddle with foreign nations until absolutely necessary. Force should be always the last resort. You try to make economic sanctions. You try to diplomacy. Ukraine is a perfect example. Look, there has not been a major escalation of violence. Theoretically, what could happen is that Russia retreats its troops after a good government is established in Ukraine. And I keep saying, Ukraine is a bad example. I mean, it's a bad example because there is reasonable debate about whether the president is legitimate or not. There's reasonable debate whether the troops of Russia are there to conquer and to expand Russia, or if they're going to try to just hold the place until there's a reasonable resolution to the conflict. Even if that means people within the country voting for secession, because that is a right for individuals to secede from their state. Again, there's a reasonable debate to be made there. I'm not supporting Russian expansionism. I'm just saying in this case in particular, there's a reasonable debate to be had.
All right, guys. Thanks.